Go. So let's start off with a blessing for our study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech
Shalom,
haolam
asher
asher
kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu
v'tzivanu la'asok
so
b'divrei
b'divrei Torah.
Torah. Amen. So we are beginning chapter 27 today, and I asked, the first verse is Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moses saying, and apropos of cash and money, this chapter is going to begin. Hi, James. Thanks for joining us. This chapter is going to begin with a discussion about how do we fund the sanctuary operations. So they didn't have synagogue dues back in that day. So how are you going to support the priests and the religious functionaries? So I've asked Terry to read us the introduction from Levine. This is from the JPS Torah Commentary series, and kind of an overview of what we can expect in this chapter. So just that paragraph.
Funding the sanctuary.
On the bottom of page 192.
Okay. It is likely that chapter 27 was appended to the book of Leviticus. From a purely textual perspective, the epilogue on 26:3 to 40, verses 3 to 46, would seem to be a suitable conclusion to the book. But in order to include in Leviticus a matter of central importance, the funding of the sanctuary, chapter 27 was added. Maybe it's time for another edition. Maintaining the physical plant of the sanctuary was certainly costly, and it was necessary to provide the materials used in public sacrifice and to support the clergy. The sources of income as set forth in this chapter were of the following kinds. 1, votive pledges in fixed amounts of silver. 2, votary pledges of animals. 3, consecrations of urban property, land holdings and acquired agricultural land. 4, firstlings. 5, donations of property that had been acquired under the law of harem, prescription. And 6, tithes of produce and livestock. The actual goal of the system of funding prescribed in chapter 27 was to secure silver for the sanctuary and its related needs, not for the most part procure the actual commodities that were pledged or consecrated. What was donated could be redeemed, and it was the redemptions payments that were sought by sanctuaries in most cases. There were exceptions, of course. For certain reasons, harem property could not be redeemed, and donated animals that were suitable for sacrifice would be retained by the sanctuary. On the whole, however, the sanctuary preferred silver. The legislation of chapter 27, although couched in traditional terms of devotion, actually worked in such a way as to provide silver for the sanctuary.
All right. Now, why do you find that so amusing, Terry?
I was thinking that we really should have an update on that, and that times haven't changed very much. And I just find it fascinatingly mundane.
There you go. Yeah, keeping the lights on costs money.
Uh-huh.
And
even when you have to just a wick and a bowl of tallow.
Right. So it's kind of like today you donate your car. People do donate cars to Temple Chai. It's not that we want people
1877 cars per kid.
Right, there you go. It's not it's not that we need 20 used cars, but it's the parallel idea. We take that car, we sell it, we get silver, and we use it to pay the electrical bill.
Lucre.
Yeah, and it's it's kind of ironic. I always not this year, but typically around the high holidays. There's all kinds of controversy in the press about, isn't it terrible how synagogues sell tickets? You shouldn't have to pay to pray. right? And we're really depicted as so greedy and unwelcoming and unloving. And the reality is, first of all, we don't have a collection during services. You know, in Christian services, it's the common, you pass the plate. Because we don't deal with money on Shabbat, we don't pass the plate in our services. So we need to find other times when we can gain access to funds that are needed. Second of all, nobody says you have to pay to pray. You pray for free anywhere you want. But if you want to have a physical building that has air conditioning and clergy and books and lights, and by the way, we can't just erect a tent once a year for the high holidays. Those operations need to be sustained. Then guess what? You know, all of that costs money. So it's the sad reality of life. So moving on to verse 2. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when anyone explicitly vows to the Lord the equivalent for a human being. So value, the equivalent of a human being, again, is a monetary value. Although if we think back to the Haftorah at Rosh Hashanah of Hannah praying for Samuel, and she pledges Samuel to the sanctuary, and in that case, it's literal. The kid, when he's 3 years old and he's weaned, he gets donated to the sanctuary and raised by Eli the priest to be kind of the household schlepper for the sanctuary operations. So it could be understood in a literal sense. I wanted to read the commentary of the Sefer HaChinuch, and again, Willie, you don't have this in front of you, so I'm just going to read it because it's very brief. The subject of valuation is part of the general topic of vows of consecration. Therefore, punishment is incurred over them for violating the injunction, he shall not break his word. At the root of the precept lies the reason that a man becomes partner in the supernal realm in no other way but through speech. This is the entire honorable, distinguished part of him. So it's just interesting to me that the Sefer HaChinuch uses this moment of talking about I'm pledging the value of a person to remind us of the fundamental importance of honoring our word and the power of words, the power of language. We're going to see this in just a couple of weeks when we start Genesis 1:1, that the whole world is created through speech. And the Sefer HaChinuch is suggesting that it is speech that connects us to the divine realm. That just as God creates the world through speech, so we connect to God. He says, in no other way but through speech. This is called in man the living spirit. For all other parts of the body die and perish. But if a man should lose this good part, the body will remain already dead as an instrument for which there is no desire. Therefore was he given the obligation to fulfill his word, his speech, which he uses for matters of heaven under all circumstances. For example, as here, regarding consecrations and all matters of charity. So if you make a pledge to the temple, you better pay it, is what he's saying. And then let's look at what those valuations are, because there's sort of an actuarial kind of a chart, different values for different individuals. The following scale shall apply. If it is a male from 20 to 60 years of age, the equivalent is 50 shekels of silver by the sanctuary weight. If it is a female, the equivalent is 30 shekels. If the age is from 5 years to 20 years, the equivalent is 20 shekels for a male and 10 shekels for a female. If the age is from 1 month to 5 years, the equivalent for a male is 5 shekels of silver, and the equivalent for a female is 3 shekels of silver. If the age is 60 years or over, the equivalent is 15 shekels in the case of a male and 10 shekels for a male. But if one cannot afford the equivalent, he shall be presented before the priest, and the priest shall assess him. The priest shall assess him according to what the vower can afford. So that's verses 1 to 8, vowing the equivalent of a human being. And
Rabbi? Sorry, Rabbi?
yeah,
What, has anybody ever figured out what an equivalent amount would be today?
I have not encountered that. But
Curious.
certainly one would hope that, for example, the male-female distinctions would no longer
You shut that door.
apply.
Sounds like a per capita tax like we had to pay where I came from. We had to pay a little tax to the township per person in the household. Kind of reminds me of that.
Uh-huh. Was it by age?
No, it was just, I think it was like $10 a person per household to the township, something like that.
Huh. Well, there's a lot of distinctions here based on age, which
Right.
presumably has to do with earning potential and just physical strength, and also gender. Yes, Barry.
Yeah, it was interesting.
I saw Barry Kipnis and then Barry Singer.
Sorry, Barry. I thought it was sort of interesting, or I think it's sort of interesting, that they actually had a senior discount. But I think the reality is that in that period of time, how many people lived to the age of 60?
Right.
And it's sort of like, let's have a senior discount at age 100 now. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
It's interesting that you look at it as a positive,
Bite your tongue.
senior discount, whereas I looked at it more as a negative, that you're worth less.
Well, I
We don't care.
because I'm a senior, okay? Because I would have qualified, okay?
That's right.
But it's
No, we don't care if we're worth less.
Excuse me, not worthless, worth less.
worth
That's what I said.
less.
Worth less.
Words.
Not as valuable, let's say.
Yeah. No, I don't like that one.
Yeah. Barry Singer?
Well, I like the 8 a.m. Costco, 9 a.m. Costco now as a senior discount.
There you go.
Interesting. I was drawn to the ratios, and the only ratio that wasn't 60% was the, where was it? From 5 to 20. From 5 to 20 years of age, the females are only worth half, and all the others were 60%. I don't know. Yeah.
That must be based on earning.
Babies.
That's what I was thinking. I'm wondering if it has to do with the risks of the childbearing years.
Or the fact they're creating more members.
But you would think that would create a higher valuation.
Yes, that's what I was wondering.
I think it's simply rounding.
Rounding.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if women are at greater risk at this time because of the risks involved in childbirth and the higher rate of death among women in childbirth.
So not the dividend of bringing forth babies, but instead the risk factor.
Yeah, David?
It's interesting that you've not addressed the question of what is a shekel worth and who is issuing the value of that shekel. How much silver was in each shekel? Was there other countries in that area that might be issuing cash? And was their silver less, more, worth less, worth more?
Yeah, so
the evaluation. This is written as if it's a uniform system
right.
that everybody can buy into. It takes nothing into account that the real world. So this is, to me, an example of somebody writing a utopian idea up rather than what reality is going to be.
Well, I'll read you what the Eitz Chaim commentary says about that. If people have that text, it's page 753. On the shekel, he says, see the comment back on Genesis. Its silver content is specified in verse 25. So let's see. That was on
12
Genesis 23:9. Let me find that.
It says 12 grams.
23.
Whatever shekel.
Oh, so that's referring to when Abraham bought the cave of Machpelah, which you're right, David. So that is two different communities making an exchange. So presumably they have to have one standard of money. He says, I'm not seeing where, oh, at the full price, literally a full silver, but kesef maleh. The silver shekel, a weight of about 0.4 ounces, 12 grams, was the most common medium of exchange in business transactions. Coinage, invented at about the end of the 8th century BCE by the Lydians, was not found in the land of Israel until the end of the biblical period. The phrase appears in ancient Near Eastern commercial documents. So it seems like there was some kind of standard understanding within the ancient Near East of what a shekel was, 0.4
But
ounces.
even so, when you look at what our ketubas, it doesn't specify shekels, it specifies Roman money, because Roman money was standardized, everybody else's money was not standardized. So it gets a question. And when you go back to New Testament, the money changers were people that could qualify how much this value was from Turkey, this money from Libya, and the exchange rates. Not so much the temple people. So
what is a gira? 20 giras. In my, so all assessments shall be by sanctuary weight, the shekel being 20 giras.
would that be grains of wheat or barley?
I don't know what that means. Is that what it is?
I'm not sure. The root sounds familiar.
Where are you seeing this?
In my Torah version, verse 25.
Oh, you're back in Genesis. Or no, you're,
Oh, I'm in Leviticus.
oh, in the Leviticus, let's see. So you went ahead. The shekel being 20 gerahs. Yeah, I see it. No, no explanation in Eitz Chaim. Let me look ahead in my notes and see if I found any.
Wikipedia indicates it as 1/20th of a shekel.
Yeah, well, 20 gerahs shall be the shekel. So 0.4 ounces of silver divided by 20.
Yeah.
Barry Kipnis, you want to tell us what that is?
I was reading.
Yeah.
Please repeat the question.
Yeah, the accountant. All right. Well, we've got till verse 23 to figure that out. Let's go back.
Yeah, go ahead.
Rabbi, just one little comment. You may recall, or maybe not, that I've always contended that chapter 27 of Leviticus was the foundation of all CPAs. As we go through this, we'll see that.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
So I wanted to go back and look at, we just read 3 to 8 as a block. I want to unpack that a little bit. So first of all, the Eitz Chaim again asks, how do we measure the value of a person? The world at large values rich people more than poor people, economically productive people more than less productive, fertile women more than childless women, clever and attractive people more than others. In God's temple, however, people are evaluated by the sanctuary weight, b'shekel hakodesh. God views our worth differently than the world does. So kind of making a beautiful homiletical principle out of this. I mean, there are still different valuations for individuals, but within each category, each person is valued the same. So if you're a woman between 5 and 20, you don't have greater value if you are fertile, if you are beautiful. So I think the commentary is trying to suggest a more elevated way of looking at the value of an individual as a Tselem Elohim, as an image of God, of applying the midah of kavod, of honor to every single person, and not judging by these distinctions of rich and poor and productive and not productive. And it is a good reminder. I mean, it's easy to get into a place of disdain for those that we view as not productive members of society for whatever reason. You know, get a job. You know, you're too good to flip burgers at McDonald's. It's very easy to be judgmental. And, you know, I think that one of the takeaways of this moment of the quarantine for me has been to sadly see how judgmental we all are of each other, of other people who are not respecting our vision of how we should be quarantining at this time. A lot of judgment going on.
Well, if you are referring to my remark,
Willa, it is not directed to any individual.
Oh, okay, because I just feel that these people who live near me are putting me in danger. That's.
I was thinking this is so off the subject. Shut up, Terry. Never mind.
No, let's hear your deep thoughts.
Well, it was in response to Willa.
Yes.
I was wondering if I lived in Florida and I went someplace and no one was wearing a mask and they were threatening my life, do I have permission from Stand Your Ground to shoot them?
Oh, goodness, great. Well, I don't believe in stand my ground, but when I see people not so
Do
much,
I?
what I tend to see where I live is people are wearing masks, but then they pull them down to speak. So I just walk away from them. I walk away from them. I can't control them, but I can control myself.
Yes.
Okay, deepest, darkest thoughts unrevealed and done.
Oh, okay. Lisa, did you want to say something?
Well, you know, just on a totally different topic. If you have the Jewish Study Bible,
Yes. I don't have it. It's in my box, but yeah.
on page 2105,
Uh-huh.
list of weights and measures,
Oh, fun.
including what a shekel weighs.
Oh,
So you know, they spell out the weight of a shekel in US grams and in European metric units. So,
Lisa, do you have any capability to scan that?
not right at the moment, I
I
don't.
didn't mean this minute, but
Oh, yeah, I could scan that.
yeah, why don't you scan it and send it to all of us? If, you know, I don't know when I'm going to be at the temple again. I guess
Okay.
I could do it at home, but if you don't mind, that would be, you know, I come from a whole family of accountants, both my parents, both my brothers. I'm the only non accountant, and there's a reason for that. So this is not my area of interest or expertise, but it sounds like there are people in this group for whom that might be interesting and meaningful.
If you take a fast peek at Wikipedia, you'll find that the shekel has spread throughout the Middle East prior to even the theoretical writing of Leviticus. And there are different values and different units. And even they mentioned that temple shekels were a different value than the currency shekels used by everybody else. And shekels is not a Hebrew word, it comes from another country.
Interesting that the current Israeli currency now is called a shekel. And what was it before the shekel? I mean, when I went to Israel as a kid, was it
Pounds
Pounds.
was it a
and agarot.
Pounds.
yeah, agarot were the things for the telephone, but was it? It wasn't
Those were Simonese.
that was a Simone, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't a lira, but it
Yes.
wasn't a shekel.
It was a lira.
It was a lira. So yeah, so it's interesting that Israel has come around to adopt the term shekel once again. That's a very contemporary phenomenon.
Well, the reason they did that was the inflation was so bad, no one would accept the word lira again when they had to reset the currency. So they just started a whole new currency based on an old word.
I remember that.
Yes, that's within most of our lifetime. So who has, you should have now, Willa, now we're into the realm of what you should have.
Thank you.
The Women's Torah Commentary, page 780, another view. So clearly the Women's Torah Commentary is going to have something to say about this difference.
Oh, really?
And women, the age of 20 for men was significant because that was draft age in the Torah.
Oh.
18 is draft age in the US. 20 was the age when men were eligible for military service.
How interesting.
And it's interesting that it only goes, that it does go up to age 60 because it was, you could only serve officially as a priest until age 50. 50 was the retirement age for priests. So there you have it. But do folks have page 780? It says another view. Who's got that?
I do.
Okay, Barry Singer. Would you read for us, please?
In the middle or the beginning?
Yeah, start from the top, another view.
Okay. So the concluding unit of Leviticus concerns the economic support base in the form of vowed resources for ancient Israel's central shrine. The first set of such votary pledges in Leviticus 27:2-8 involves the equivalence in silver of persons according to categories of gender and age, with separate assessments listed for females and males in 4 age groups. Because of the greater monetary values assigned to males in each age category, scholars have sometimes understood this table of valuations as an expression of gender bias, with females considered inherently less valuable than males. However, many commentators now understand that this table relates mainly to labor potential rather than to intrinsic worth. The highest monetary values appear for persons ages 20 to 60. Such people would be considered mature adults, given the fact that biblical census texts list males of age 20 and above, namely those who might be conscripted into military service, that the youngest age category is that of 1 to 5-year-olds can be explained by presuming that ancient Israel was like many pre-modern agrarian societies in expecting children of very young ages to perform simple household tasks. Perhaps because of average differences in physical strength, women or girls were deemed to have a lower productive capacity than males of the same age, and thus Leviticus 27 assigns them a somewhat lower valuation in all categories. The differential shekel values attached to females and males provide an insight into the labor patterns in Israelite households and the associated status of women. The best way to view the table is to sum the value of the 2 genders in each age bracket, thus obtaining the combined labor value of a female to male pair of workers in each category. Then we can compare the contribution of each gender to this total amount. Okay, except for the 5 to 20 category, in which childbearing, presumably beginning at puberty, might reduce the labor potential of females, the female percentage of that combined female to male amount is at or near 40%. Social scientists who study the relative contributions of women and men to household labor in various cultures have noticed that a 2 to 3 female to male ratio, with women supplying 40% of the subsistence labor, correlates with the maximum prestige for women. Thus, the table of valuations in Leviticus 27 is hardly a reflection of female inferiority, but rather provides evidence of a positive estimation of women.
I'm looking at
That's a
everyone's,
ra-
looking
that's a-
around at the faces, and there's a lot of, huh?
Yeah, I was not going to react. I want to
No,
hear
yeah.
other people's thoughts before I give my opinion here.
To me, it just sounded like such a machinations and twisting to try and get to a point of view.
Yeah.
All right, Barry Kipnis.
Let Stan go first. He was first.
Oh, okay, thanks. Stan, you're on.
Me? No, attempt at rationalization. But if you look at the labor, I mean, the labor value.
Oops.
Still not a justification because women did the other work, which was just as consuming and as important. So it's a rationalization and a fictionalization of just because men were writing the Torah, not women. So that's the
All
way
right,
I see it.
now Barry Kipnis and then
I'm looking at it a little differently. It's
please.
necessarily a CPA view, but just as
Go ahead.
and that is that really they're talking about individual requirements of payment. The payments really came from family units because most capital in that period was in the hands of men, and very little in the hands of women. So and there was polygamy, so that if a man had 3 wives, which would not have been unusual, he would have been paying, and between the ages of 20 and 60, he would have been paying the 50 for himself and the 90 for the 3 wives. So you're dealing with a unified, I'll call it a unified tax system in effect. So and it was familial payment based on census, not necessarily women are worth this and men are worth that, but the family structure was required to make a certain payment. I will not go into the political correctness of men were worth more than women or women were undervalued, but you have a reality of where's the money, or and the money was in the hands of, for the most part, in the hands of men, and they were the ones making the payments.
Barry, I understand what you're saying and I agree with you to a large extent, but what it ignores is that the labor, the value, is created by both men and women working together or separately in a family to create that. It averages out. I don't see that you can actually separate the value that women provide and men provide, because in a standard.
But there had to be a means, Owen, of creating a per capita valuation, so a family unit.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter. But there had to be a means of doing the math.
Right, and rather than do it on a family unit basis, it gets divided by the men and women, which is
right, which we're going to address in just a minute. That the assumption is that the family unit is a biologic male and female. And we're going to look at that in just a second. But Becca is trying to.
No, I actually, Barry Kipnis just made my point about the family unit and that there could be a husband and multiple wives, because there would never be, I assume, a family that was headed by a female. Because if a husband died, then the women weren't going to take over the family farm. So if that were to happen, their value should have increased if suddenly they were doing the labors of a male. But I assume that was never going to happen because women weren't going to be given the opportunity to own the land and work the land and all of that.
Although just in last week's Parsha, we had the Benot Tzlofchad, the daughters of Tzlofchad, who agitated to Moses that they should be allowed to inherit their father's property in the absence of any male heirs. And, Moses was confused, didn't know what to do, and went to God, and God said, yeah, they're right. But the proviso was that they had to marry, presumably,
Exactly.
and from within the same tribe.
Right. And yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you weren't going to see, Mrs. Schwartz running the family farm. It was going to be Mrs. Schwartz, who, widowed, is now going to have to marry someone else from a tribe. And so again, you have this male dominating the household, but whatever.
So I wanted to read you, I didn't photocopy for you this, but on the next page, the Women's Torah commentary addresses non-specific gender identities. So if it is a female, the equivalent is 30 shekels. The scale of fixed human value established here remains uncontested and unchanged in rabbinic tradition and does not receive much further commentary. The rabbis devoted much more attention to regulating individualized vows, such as vowing someone's weight or even the weight of a particular body part. Interestingly, the rabbis take note that the Torah differentiates between the weight of male and female, and they therefore insist that those who refers to those who are quote unquote definitely male and definitely female. This is one of the many contexts in Jewish law where the rabbis introduced the concept of indeterminable sexual identity, namely the hermaphrodite, androgynos, and the non-sexed person, tumtum, only to exclude such people from the scale of human valuation. So if you can't determine the biological sexual identity of the individual, then they're excused from this whole conversation. However, the Mishnah considers both the androgynos and the tumtum fully human, and therefore able to make vows of valuation on someone who is of unambiguous sexual identity. So if you are a hermaphrodite or have a biological sexual identity that can't be determined, you can't pledge your own value. Somebody else can't pledge your value because we don't know if you're male or female and how to calculate that value. However, that individual could make a pledge on someone else's behalf. So I found that whole nuance in the conversation to be extremely fascinating, that even 2,000 years ago, the rabbis were struggling with this issue of gender identity, and that we can talk about the male, we can talk about the female, but recognizing that that this is a continuum of sexual identity, that it's not always 100% clear, male, female. I thought that was kind of advanced for the time. Yes, David.
Becca, something rang a bell and I had to go offline and check, but there were legal suits by women that they could own property and their daughters could inherit property. And you found these papers of suits and countersuits among the papers Papias found at the Dead Sea Scrolls. So women could own property, they could sue for property, and they could transfer property to their daughters if they didn't have any sons or brothers.
What would be the era of those papers, do you think?
Dead Sea Scrolls time period.
So by the way, Lisa, you're off the hook because James already copied an email to everybody that chart.
Oh, okay. Thank you, James.
How did you do that so fast, James? Thank you.
I know, really.
He's all set up.
Superpower.
Very good. So you should have in your packet page 465 from the Sefer HaChiyuv. It starts off with, then there is what the sages likewise taught on this subject.
There it is. Yeah.
And he also is going to expand on this tumtum and androgynos. So who has that at hand? It's page 465. It looks like this.
I've got it.
Becca, you've got it. Would you please read it for us?
Then there is what the sages likewise taught on this subject. that there is no difference in valuation, whether a person is handsome or ugly, ill or blind or one-handed. Rather, all are given a valuation according to the years of age as the Torah ordained about them.
Now,
There is
this text of Sefer Chinuch is from the 13th century. So that's when this commentator is writing.
There is too what they stated that, quote, value, unquote, is not the same as, quote, valuation, unquote, atachim. For if someone said, quote, the value of so-and-so be upon me, unquote, to pay, he gives how much the other is worth, and no attention is paid to years of age at all. For the Torah commanded to give the valuation according to years only if a person specifically vows the valuation, as we explained. General, unspecified vows of valuation or value are to be given for keeping the temple in repair, and the whole is always put into the treasury that was maintained at the sanctuary for the funds consecrated for temple repairs.
Infrastructure.
There you go.
The
There
building.
is the building fund, right? There is further the law about a tumtum, one of uncertain gender, a hermaphrodite, a non-Jew, or a heathen slave who vowed a valuation or were evaluated. The law of an expiring man, that his valuation and his value are nil. The law about a person who goes forth sentenced to be put to death. The law if a person vows the valuation of one organ or limb. The law if someone says, quote, my weight be upon me, unquote, to pay. The law if one says, quote, my height be upon me, unquote, or my full height be upon me, unquote. And if one says, quote, I hereby take it upon myself to give in consecration silver and gold, unquote, and does not specify from which coin. And the law if a person vowed a valuation and he did not have the means to pay the valuation he chose, how matters are arranged for him. It is about this situation that the sages said, of those who owe valuations or values, objects are taken in pledge, and the pledged object is returned to them neither in the day nor at night. Whatever is found in their possession is sold, be it landed property or movable goods, even clothing and utensils, and needless to say, slaves and livestock. However, clothes of their wives, sons, or daughters are not to be sold for them, nor even clothing that he died with them in mind, nor new sandals, shoes, if he but bought them on their behalf before he vowed the valuation. So likewise, if a person consecrates all his possessions, he has not consecrated these.
Interesting. So you can't pledge your wife or children's clothing or their new shoes. New shoes being a tremendous value. You know, we have in our morning blessings, Hanotein la Ya'ev Koach, Rokaha Aretz al Hamayim, you know, those series of blessings in the morning. And there's one blessing which unfortunately the Mishkan Tefillah has removed from the morning blessings, although it is in the high holiday Machzor, Sha'asa li kol tzarki, you took care of all of my needs. And that was traditionally the blessing that was said as you were putting on your shoes, because shoes were considered to be of such a high value that if you had shoes, Sha'asa li kol tzarki, you took care of all of my needs. But it is it is interesting to see how the Sefer HaChinuch, I think, breaks it down to all of these nuances of the valuation, that it's it's more than just a male and a female and the age categories, that as we delve into it, there are a lot more distinctions to be made. Barry Singer?
Yeah, how do these come into play? We've talked so much about if you accidentally took the life of someone, here's a compensation that you have to give. How do they compare? I don't remember.
There's no compensation for life. It's one of the mitzvot that is in all 5 books of the Torah, is that death, causing someone's death is capital punishment. So there's no financial compensation available in the case of murder.
Life for life. Okay.
Right.
Even in accidental?
Well, accidental, then you had to go to the manslaughter was the City of Refuge.
Oh, okay.
Had to have 3 cities of refuge on each side of the Jordan. Remember, with roads that had to be maintained by the community that were well marked, and the punishment for manslaughter, was sort of a house arrest, but not in your own home, in the City of Refuge.
So there's no financial compensation
Right.
given or the tribe.
Right.
What was I, like not a gulag, but a sort of an open campus prison for these people?
Like a town that was made up just of people who had committed manslaughter.
Must have been a fun place.
It was called the City of Refuge because the assumption was that the family members would be trying to enact their own justice, and this was a place where the person could live out their life in safety and protection, although only until the death of the high priest. Remember, when the high priest died, that was the signal that everybody could be released from the cities of refuge and go back to scratch, which is why the Talmud suggests that the mother of the high priest used to bring cookies to the City of Refuge to call favor so that the whole town wasn't praying for her son to die.
All right.
Good. So we have a source now that I wanted to look at that we have never seen before. It's a book I only recently read. It's not a Torah commentary, but there's a book called We See It So Differently. It was written by Leonard Felder. So I don't know if we'll get to finish this, but I would like to start it. So it looks in your packet like so. So it's Leonard Felder is the author of one of my favorite all-time books, The 7 Prayers That Can Change Your Life. He also wrote a book on the 10 Commandments, and this is a brand new book that's come out just in the last couple of years about how to resolve differences in families. It's directed specifically to families, but in the community, addressing the current state of political divisiveness in which we live, and how can we come to peace with differences among people to whom we feel so close. It's expanding on this androgynous and tum idea, and dealing with how we can come to peace with our understanding of gender difference. So do folks have this?
I have it.
Yes.
All right, Michelle, do you want to start reading for us there? It's the top says Leonard Felder, PhD. I wrote in, We See It So Differently, page 34. Yeah, thanks.
So, one final Jewish method, finding the joy of radical amazement for the diversity of creation. I will end this chapter with one additional Jewish tool for dealing with LGBT issues. It's something that has been discussed by many Jewish teachers, including Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who trained many prominent rabbis, marched with Martin Luther King Jr., and wrote several excellent books on how to appreciate the diversity and holiness of life. Heschel described a human spiritual phenomenon, which he called opening up to radical amazement. It might be when you look at something fascinating or beautiful in nature and you experience awe and gratitude that we live in such an abundant and diverse world. Each snowflake, each leaf, each tiny insect, each new scientific or medical breakthrough, each delicious and nutritious food or herb, we have been given so much as a result of the ongoing creation of the universe. Can we stop for a moment and just breathe in a sense of amazement, awe, or gratitude? For some Jews, that sense of radical amazement at the rich diversity of life extends to the issue of LGBT gender expression. While many people are uncomfortable or even hostile towards those who live outside the two boxes of very male or very female, there is an increasing awareness in our society that gender is a rich spectrum, as diverse and colorful as the light spectrum of thousands of shades and hues that flashes across the sky after a rainstorm or when the sun streams in through a certain type of glass, window pane, or prism. If you study Jewish sources, you will find that this amazement and appreciation for the diverse spectrum of gender expression varieties goes way back in Jewish history. For example, most people don't realize that in the Torah, the Talmud, and the Mishnah commentaries, there are at least 6 variations of gender described as part of God's creation, including 149 references in Mishnah and Talmud to the androgynous person who has both male and female characteristics, 181 references in Mishnah and Talmud to the tumtum person who has indeterminate or obscured sexual characteristics, 80 references in Mishnah and Talmud to the Elionite person who is identified as female at birth but develops male characteristics at puberty, and 156 references in Mishnah and Talmud to the Saris person who is identified as male at birth but develops female characteristics later on.
Great, so stop there. Is there somebody else who's got it who can continue reading for us?
I've got it, but anybody else?
Sure, Stan.
Yeah, thanks,
In
Dan.
addition, there are hundreds of rabbinic and scholarly articles written opinions about whether God is beyond gender, transgender, constantly shifting in gender expression, or male as Adonai and female as Shekhinah, the indwelling presence. One of the Hebrew words for God is Rashman. Rahman. Is that compassion? I'm trying to read it.
Yes.
The compassionate one. And it grammatically refers to the male womb that nurtures and encompasses all of creation. What exactly is a male womb? Is it a male or female or both or neither? If you think of the world as being nurtured and held together by a force field or a womb-like source of support and can't tell, is that
nutrients?
Nutrients, it is nutrients, okay. Does it seem to you to be male womb, a female womb, or a womb that is beyond gender?
Great. A couple more paragraphs. Anybody else have it there?
I have it.
Okay. Barry Singer, you haven't read yet. Other scholars?
Okay. Other scholars have written about the fact that if God is beyond gender, and if we are B'Tselem Elohim, created in the image of God, then to some extent, we too are beyond the gender boxes of male and female. Do you see yourself and others as B'Tselem Elohim, created in the image of God? If so, does this spark of the divine deep in your soul have a gender? Or is it a blend of genders? Or is it beyond gender? There are also hundreds of scholarly articles and rabbinic teachings on what is meant by the phrase in Genesis 1:27. Then God created the first human in God's image, male and female. God created them. What was the first human exactly? Was it a gender fluid being that was both male and female? Was it a them rather than a he or a she?
So I'll finish up the last two paragraphs. With regard to whether we Jews are gender compliant or gender non-conforming on a day-to-day level, our history shows that Jews for many centuries have been in the forefront of several social change movements in which many Jewish women have said, We are strong and can do a lot more than the typical feminine gender stereotype. And many Jewish men have said we can be nurturing, sensitive, compassionate, and receptive, far different from the typical male gender stereotype. What has been your personal experience with gender stereotypes and whether they fit you or not? Have you ever rebelled against the rigid expectations that someone tried to assign to you because of your gender? Who are the Jewish role models you look to as examples of someone who took the gender roles and stretched them or discarded them in order to accomplish things that were far beyond what the gender rules and regulations said were permitted? So, very intriguing questions there that I'm going to leave on the table right now to pick up with next week. I will say, for myself personally, and maybe it goes without saying, I grew up at a time where there were no female rabbis. So the decision in 1967, which is when I first articulated the desire to be a rabbi, was a time when there were 0 female rabbis in the world. There was a woman named Regina Jonas, who in the early part of the 20th century had been ordained in Germany, but that was a one-time exceptional, little known example, certainly not a role model for me in Brooklyn in 1967. So just interesting in my own personal response to this, that I grew up with no role models, and yet somehow never connected the dots that women couldn't be rabbis, which was in fact the case. Women couldn't be ordained as rabbis, could not apply to and be accepted as students at rabbinical school. I guess in my own little 11-year-old brain, maybe I just thought I had never met any female rabbis. The first woman who was ordained in the United States was Sally Presand, who graduated Hebrew Union College in 1973. And then the following year, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, Sandy Sasso, graduated. So she was the second in this country. It wasn't until 1985, which is in most of our close historical memory, that the first female conservative rabbi, Amy Eilberg, was ordained. And now, of course, the Orthodox world is really struggling with how to adapt to this issue. And what's happening is that women are being ordained and recognized as leaders in their community, but not in a parallel way to the role of a rabbi, to the role of a male rabbi. So I am going to leave it there. We'll pick up next week, kind of unpacking and discussing this text, and I'll resend the URL for those of you who don't have it. And I recommend the book. It's a great, very contemporary book. It's not terribly long to read, and I think you can pick up just from the little section that we read that Leonard Felder writes in a very accessible, scholarly yet popular manner. So with that, let's conclude with Oseh Shalom Ramav, Uya Oseh Shalom, Aleinu Yaakov Israel V'imru. Amen. So yes, Terry Berman, are you just waving goodbye?
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. We love you. Okay, thanks everybody for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.